to welcome you to our very first In Conversation With, and this is going to be content that we're going to be releasing from as part of the Diversity and Inclusion Bus Group, which is all part of Women in Transport. And our first In Conversation With is with Olivia Scalina, and she is the Accessibility and Inclusion Officer for Lothian Buses. So welcome, Olivia.
Hi, thank you.
So Olivia, we'll go straight in. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself and about your career to date?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my career has been a bit of a weavy, windy road that has just always centred around disability. So I graduated from the University of Dundee and I moved back down south to where I was brought up. My first job after uni was at the National Spinal Injury Centre. And that's in Stoke Mandeville, where the Paralympics began. So that just ignited my love of everything accessible, everything that promoted healthy lifestyle and just getting back into main life with a disability. And I worked in rehabilitation. So I secured a sponsorship for a project where I would take newly injured men and women back out into the community to try and encourage that integration after a new life-changing disability. And we would go and I'd teach some wheelchair skills, we'd go on public transport, we'd investigate going back to work. So it meant that I needed to take hundreds of buses, national rail services, negotiating the London Tube system with wheelchair users. And it really made me appreciate, although I loved the problem solving aspect of it, it made me appreciate how many barriers there were that would have been totally avoidable if they'd considered people with a disability in the planning stages of things. So as much as I love the problem solving, I found it frustrating from my patient's point of view. All these barriers that able-bodied people had put in that didn't necessarily need to be there. Then I started a managerial role at the local sports centre where I was in charge of the disability and the access side of things. And then I was able to be influencing the planning. So I was able to bring the opinions of local disabled people into the planning of what was going to be put into place. And that was really rewarding for me. So when me and my fiance moved back to Scotland, all I knew that I wanted to do was find a role where I was helping people access their local community. And then I interviewed for Lothian and I'm right in the heart of that now, which is fantastic.
What a fantastic, real life experience that you've had that you're able to bring with you. I mean, what were the biggest barriers then? That's really interesting that people found when they were trying to kind of get back into kind of using public transport.
The one thing that I found, and I found it interesting because since I've joined Lothian, I've asked the opinion of a lot of our community, is that when people think of accessibility, they think of physical barriers like ramps, steps, and things that really only affect kind of wheelchair users or that kind of thing. And I think the biggest barrier is attitude. When it comes to accessibility, it's attitude and the way people are regarded and how people are treated. I think that's the biggest barrier rather than anything physical, because the physical stuff you can do small changes, but changing an attitude can be institutional. You know, it's really, really difficult to crack that. So that's the biggest barrier I found.
Yeah, really, really interesting.
Yeah, a good attitude almost overrides a lot of physical barriers that are annoying. You know, if you have someone that's willing to help and willing to promote someone's independence, between you can find ways around steps and curbs, but you have to have that attitude.
Yeah, fascinating. And I suppose that is, I suppose the kind of, what did that give you a perception of the bus industry before you joined, or?
It did, and obviously the buses we were using, we were down south, so it wasn't Edinburgh, it wasn't Scotland, it wasn't anything that I'm experiencing now, but it was rural buses around the hospital where the kind of physical accessibility was sometimes a bit iffy. You wouldn't always get a working ramp. You wouldn't always get a kneeling bus because it was community bus stuff. And so the attitude of the driver made a massive difference, and the attitude of other customers, because you needed to pull together to make something accessible for people. And then you go into London and it's very different. It's very different because physical accessibility is almost given when it comes to public transport there. Things are really easy in terms of physical accessibility, but there's much less interaction between the driver because they operate in a completely different way. And with other customers, you know, they've got somewhere to be and they've got somewhere to go. So where you rely on people's attitude in rural areas, you can rely on the physical accessibility in big city centres. They don't necessarily marry in both places.
And do you think, I mean, what do you think around kind of how much we are actually doing as an industry to improve accessibility?
Really, when I joined the bus industry, I didn't think it would be as progressive as it is, because my experience was rural buses. I don't think I acknowledged how progressive it would be. And the thing is, there's always going to be work to do. There's always going to be improvements to be made. And unless a disabled person's experience of using public transport is just as easy as it is for you or me, then there are improvements that need to be made. But I think we will see improvements now that people are more keen on employing disabled people, pulling in people with access requirements into the planning stages, because then you're not wasting time and effort making these changes later on retrospectively. You're making these tiny little physical access tweaks right at the beginning of your planning stages. You're empowering people to have a part of accessibility in their local community. And I think that's where we're improving as an industry, is we're beginning to harness the knowledge and understanding and experience that there is within the community, rather than us as experts thinking and making the decisions. It's having the bravery to go to the community and say, the knowledge is with you, what do you need?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's all about kind of having that connection and that kind of communication with the community that you're serving. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to almost like it feels like it's that culture change that's needed, where we don't think we know everything and we just kind of just plow ahead with kind of, oh, we've always done it that way. It's about bringing in people's views and having those discussions, and like you say, that planning element. Do you think, so how do you kind of go about getting your colleagues or getting organisations to start thinking in that way that's kind of so different to how they've done things in the past?
Well, see, when I interviewed for Lothian, I knew so little about the bus industry, and I knew that I was interviewing at a business that had been going for 100 years. And in my head, I was thinking male dominated, probably kind of middle age, kind of accessibility was just not going to be a priority. And I'm so used to accessibility and inclusion being a tick box that kind of people have to go and not really being invested in. And then I came into Lothian and they completely proved me wrong, because I was thinking, you know, you guys are experts in buses. I don't know about buses. I haven't got a disability or an access requirement myself. So, and I'm relatively young, you know, when coming into an industry like this, how, you know, are they going to listen to me? And they've been thirsty for knowledge and opinion and learning, and it's been amazing. And even the senior staff have been so keen to listen. They've come to me, they've wanted to run things by me, they've invited me and welcomed me into conversations about future bus design and about all of our website changes and looking at kind of more operational side of things. And it's been amazing to see that it was integral in Lothian all along. They just didn't have the person through which to channel their ideas. And I think that will be the same in lots of transport sectors, because nowadays everyone has some kind of experience of access requirements, because we're not just talking about disability, we're talking about old age, we're talking about parents with young children in buggies, because accessibility, it's not just people in wheelchairs, it goes so much further than that. And everyone in the business knows someone that tries to use a bus with a buggy, or has an elderly relative, or someone that's confused, or someone that has learning disabilities or autism or visual or hearing impairments. It touches everyone. So everyone has an opinion and they want to feed into that. And I've just managed to be a bit of a vessel to hear that internally, and to just reach out to the neighbourhood. And I've done that by contacting organisations and building a network of charities and care homes and support services. And everyone is just so keen to feed into Lothian, because it's like an institution in Edinburgh. It's really strange. It's like the big brother of Edinburgh, where everyone's looking out for Lothian, and Lothian's looking out, and really want to take an active part in it. So it's been easy to gather opinion, because people love their bus service and they want to help make it better. So the last year's been a steep learning curve, but it's been so enjoyable because it's been so invested in by the community, but also by the business.
That's fantastic. And if there was one thing that, I know, you've got your network set up, and you're kind of having those conversations with the community. If there was one thing that you could resolve or solve overnight, what would that be?
I don't think this is going to be news to anyone, but the pandemic has had the most incredibly drastic effect on all of us, but on the disabled and the chronic illness and the elderly population, there's been some irreparable damage. And for a lot of us, we'll return to some kind of normal, but there'll be people that won't see a normal again, because although it's been difficult for us, we're now thinking of when are we going to see our families again, and we're thinking of when can we go for a drink in the pub. And there are still people that are in their house and they've been shielding, and they've stayed in their house for over 12 months now. And this is a community that previously there was already a level of isolation, and I see my job within Lothian as kind of working with the community to bring people back out into the community, access public transport, because for a lot of these people, public transport is vital. They rely on public transport. There isn't access to cars or money for taxis or the ability to walk or cycle long distances. So if public transport doesn't work for people, they're at home. They can't access things that they need to. And the ability to be independent, we're not just talking about people who can live at home. We're talking about mums with small children in buggies, and we're talking about carers, they care for family members, or they're key workers, they're working in key worker roles. And there's this nervousness about leaving the house now and using public transport and accessing the community. And I think if I could change anything, it would maybe be how, as a community, these individuals have been considered and recognised and perceived over the last year, because it's been front page news about issues around vaccine priority lists and DNR orders, and I think how these people are portrayed with face covering exemptions as well. They feel that their value in the community is just plummeted. And I think that's what we really need to work around, is that although the pandemic has brought about some positive changes that we can use, working from home, using virtual meetings and things that can really work for some people with access needs, their value in the community, because of things and decisions that have been made over the last year, has really gone down. And we need to try and give these people, their value back again, and they need to get their value back, because it's been a really, really pivotal year for disability and vulnerability, and it's not all been positive.
Yeah, you know, it is really sad, isn't it? It's almost like it's highlighted kind of the big gaps as well in our society.
Massively. I almost feel like we were getting to a place of inclusion within Britain, and you know, all the be kind messaging and people cracking down on social media trolls and really trying to have a more equal and more kind environment. But then because of the pandemic, there became this massive segregation of people who can and people who can't, and people who feel safe and people that don't. And frustrations caused by all sorts of decisions throughout the last year have just caused massive segregation between these two groups of people that previously were really able to work together. And it means that those of us without access needs or without chronic illness, without disability, are almost getting to the point where we're putting it all behind us. And then we have another group of people that are still living in fear, but now they don't have the support of the other group. It's huge. It's pivotal, and that's kind of where Lothian are looking for our next kind of project, and well, our first kind of accessibility boost as well.
So do you think that the rest of the, I mean, we'll move on from this point in a minute, but I think it's really interesting. Do you think the rest of the industry or society in general, do you think they actually understand how pivotal this is? Or do you think people have grasped how, you know, how serious the issue is?
I'm sure I haven't grasped how serious the issue is, and I work within this. You know, although I try and, because of my interest in my job and what I care about, I try and have an understanding about the needs of people. I'm not disabled. I haven't got additional access requirements, so I don't know. But we need to amplify the voices, because it's not for me to tell people disabled people are struggling and disabled people need you to do this. It's to amplify the voices of the people of the disabled people. And it's the same in all areas of the industry. You don't need to ask your able-bodied disability expert, you need to ask the disabled people and the vulnerable people, because we're talking about mental health condition and elderly and all these people in your community. We need to raise their voices up, because if you think about it, accessibility benefits everyone. There's not really any access protocol that's put in place anywhere that makes life more difficult for us. It's not an inconvenience to put ramps in. It doesn't make my day worse, but it completely changes how it is. So I think if accessibility and the problems that have arisen from the pandemic for these people become more public knowledge, it will benefit everyone across the board.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, you were going to speak about, I think you might have been, about a project that you're starting at Lothian around this. Is, you know, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, when I started at Lothian, it was January last year. So I started having ideas, started meeting people, started talking to people. That's what I did for months. I just met with organisations and groups of people with access needs in Edinburgh. And I got a bit of a feel for what was needed. And then pandemic hit. No one's taken public transport, especially the people that are vulnerable, because they're told you must not, it's not safe for you. And all these other things came into play during the pandemic, and the segregation between those with additional requirements and those without additional requirements came. And it highlighted for me what I was even thinking last January, is that there's a preconceived idea of disability amongst most people. So what I've discussed with the staff and what the staff have fed back to me, is that we need to highlight the prevalence of hidden disability within our community. And we need to highlight that within our customers, but also within our colleagues, because hidden disability, you know, affects every community. And that's really our focus for this next year, is to use staff and customer spotlights to say, you know, these people are amongst us, they're doing jobs, they're parents, they're family members, they're carers, they're independent individuals, and you can't see just by looking at them, but they have additional needs. Sometimes it may be that they really need access to those priority seats, or they really need a bit more time and space while they're negotiating our services, or they may not be able to wear a face covering. And we're really trying to highlight that, because I think that's been, with face coverings, that's obviously been a big deal. Face covering exemption over the last year has been a really conflicting kind of area. But before that, we had priority seats. You know, we had people who looked normal sitting in priority seats, needing them, but telling them, you know, they should move. And it's the hardest thing is creating a change in attitude. And we can do through staff training and CBD and stuff like that. We can change, or we can look to change our staff and our colleagues' attitude. But to influence the attitude of our customers is huge, and that is really the kind of role we're going to try and take this year. Is by using customer spotlights. What we're calling it we're trying to create a culture of inclusion across the city of Edinburgh. So we're looking to highlight the prevalence of disability, show that these people are contributing members to society and have additional needs. And again, just by being kind, it will make life easier for everyone, because these are the people, again, that we need to get back into society, you know, being independent again, that will be more worried than just you or I about getting back on a bus. So
that's really interesting, the whole idea of culture of inclusion. What a fabulous idea to, you know, where you're kind of, you're just known for being inclusive, you know, with
and it, because people need to realize again that accessibility is not just wheelchair user, blind person, deaf person, old person. It's not that. It's probably more. It's probably 60% of our commuters, our travelers, and our passengers. You know, it's parents with small children, and mental health, and cognitive impairments, and brain injury, and the list just goes on and on and on. It's anyone that needs something more than the minimum requirements, and the minimum requirements are covered by law, but we need to do so much more to make buses really, the services really be accessible. And a lot of that is just the attitude of people around you. I mean, you know how much of a barrier people's attitudes can be on a daily basis. You know, if you go out and do your shopping and you're met with conflict, it's a barrier to us without a disability or without an additional need. So this really is trying to just create a sweeping attitude change. But over the last year, that attitude change has swept in the other direction, and we just need to really look to highlight, create an openness and an honestness about vulnerability in Edinburgh, with colleagues, with our staff, with our customers, and say people need more from you, and we expect more from you.
Excellent. Sounds really great. I'll watch it with great interest.
Well, as soon, we can only start creating this culture of change when we are allowed to appropriately welcome people back onto our services. And now is not that time, but we hope soon will be. And then we can really launch with a bit of a bang. Welcome back. You are very much welcome here. And we will do what we can to make you feel comfortable. And we need our other customers' support to allow that to happen. That was going to be our messaging.
I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because the pandemic as well, in kind of how we're, it's almost given us time to sit back and think around kind of, you know, people's behaviour has changed, hasn't it? So even, you know, when we're just trying to do messages around combating that negative message from the government that was about don't get on public transport, you know, don't travel. It really makes you sit back and think of the wider communication, you know, in a much more in-depth way. And
absolutely, there are lots of positives that we will be able to take from the pandemic. new parents and disabled people have spent decades wanting to work from home and have more flexible working. But now, because it's been swept out across everyone and you know, the mainstream population have been able to work from home, hopefully that's opened up some doors. And even things like wider paths so that there's more room for crossing and things, they're all great for accessibility. And the opportunity to do things virtually, but not everyone can access things digitally. You know, some face-to-face benefits a lot of people with disability. And the idea of people offering hands-on help to anyone at the moment is just a taboo. Where you might see someone, an older person, struggling to get their shopping into the back of their car, and you might offer a hand. People are just much less likely to do that now. And we need to get back into a world where it's totally okay and it's totally appropriate to ask people if they want physical help or guidance. But people need to feel safe with that, and it needs to be done in a gentle way. So that, you know, swings and roundabouts, there's good things that will come from this, but there are things that we need to work back up to our standard again.
No, absolutely, yeah. So finally, Olivia, it's been really, really interesting. And the last question for you is, if you had one piece of advice for the industry around improving accessibility, what would it be?
Easy peasy. There is, I keep saying it, a wealth of knowledge and lived experience in our communities from people who have disabilities and have additional access needs. Harness it. I mean, it's great when people are employing accessibility and inclusion officers who are there to help kind of raise that voice up. But we need to be asking our communities, if we want to make changes in terms of accessibility, ask the disabled people, ask the mums of parents, of children in buggies. We need to get those voices, and we need to get them in at the planning stages, because imagine the time and money that could be saved if we get it right the first time without having to retrospectively critique and change things that are put into place. So bringing people with additional needs in right at the beginning in the planning stages, making small, tiny tweaks to plans that we're putting forward, long term will just make things easier for everyone. And that's what it is. It's about including the community in the first draft of plans that go out.
Excellent. It's kind of, it's definitely, it's almost like, it's that talking to people. It's that kind of, that thing you spoke about at the beginning, when that having that network is so key.
Well, people will say to me, we don't get that many complaints from people with additional access needs about our services. And so my first thing was, well, how accessible is the complaints procedure? Actually, it's really accessible. How likely do you think it is that people will put in a complaint if they have additional access needs, they've got other things going on in their day? And the thing is, you know, in every community, you have the loud voices that want to be heard, but you have so many people who think that their opinion won't be listened to, won't be counted, doesn't matter, it only affects them. And sometimes you need to go and ask, because the opinions won't come to you. We've got loads of vocal customers who will tell us what they want to change, but it won't be coming from these people who really rely on the services. We need to go out and ask for that. And with a business that's busy and has hundreds of employees, sometimes you need to employ one who is literally going to go out and field that and bring that up and take it straight to the board. And I think that's literally what my role is. I'm just a facilitator.
Oh, thank you. It's been really, really interesting. And I've certainly learned a lot, Olivia. So thank you so much for being our first in conversation with.
Thanks very much.